The hidden reason why America's fastest-growing cities are doomed to fail. The bathtub ring towered like a warning label around Lake Mead. Intake pipes sat exposed to air that felt hotter than the concrete. Pumps rattled through the evening as a city of 5 million waited for water that might not come tomorrow. They didn't know it yet, but growth had outrun the map. To understand why Phoenix, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, and the Front Range kept booming while the water shrank, skip the politics. This is physics and geography. The Colorado River was overpromised on paper. Aquifers were drained like one-time batteries. Heat made everything thirstier. Homes, jobs, and whole economies leaned on vanishing supplies. The desert ledger, limits written in stone. Start with the land. The baseline here is aridity, not drought. The desert doesn't fail when rain doesn't fall, it behaves as designed. Precipitation is low and wildly variable. Summers load the atmosphere with heat that pulls moisture from soil and skin. Evapotranspiration wins most days. Even when clouds deliver a rare burst, the sun and wind claw back their share before the water can settle. Think in budgets. A hydrologic budget has inflows and outflows, precipitation, snowmelt, groundwater recharge in, evaporation, transpiration, runoff, and pumping out. In the Sun Belt and the Mountain West, the climate stamps a deficit at the bottom of the page almost every year. A surplus isn't the rule, it's the exception that misleads newcomers. People see lawns and lakes and assume stability. The ledger says otherwise. Snowpack is the original reservoir. High mountains store winter as crystalline credit, then release it as spring and early summer melt. That timing worked for smaller populations with smaller demands. Now the mismatch is obvious. Peak melt is shifting earlier with warmer springs, while peak urban and agricultural demand leans later into summer heat. The tap that matters is a sloping curve on a thermometer, not a valve in a plant. And as the snowline climbs, more storms fall as rain that runs off quickly instead of lingering as snow that feeds rivers slowly. Storage shrinks, timing slips, and the gap widens. Look underfoot. Much of the desert's skin is fast. Thin soils over hardpan or bedrock shove water sideways, not down. Intense monsoon bursts carve arroyos and send chocolate water roaring into dry washes, then onward to evaporation basins. Flash floods are spectacle, not savings. They cut roads, uproot cottonwoods, and then vanish into thin air. Groundwater gets a sip. Most of the glass tips back to the sky. One wet year is a mirage that comforts budgets. The climate here isn't defined by averages, it's ruled by swings. Multi-decadal droughts, real mega-droughts, are part of the historical pattern, and recent reconstructions show the 21st century slump competing with the worst in more than 1,000 years. You don't fix a long arithmetic problem with a single lucky roll of the dice. A big snowpack buys time, not a trend. The mind loves a comeback story, the ledger doesn't. Now look at what humans tried. We ran water uphill against geography. The Central Arizona project slings the Colorado River more than 300 miles and lifts it thousands of feet to reach Phoenix and Tucson. Canals thread the valleys, stitching suburbs to rivers that lie over the horizon. Reservoirs, Mead, Powell, dozens more were meant to tame timing and turn a fickle river into a machine. For a while, it looked like triumph. The ledger even flashed black during wet decades. But the interest never stopped accruing in heat and evaporation. Here's the quiet math. The surface area penalty. Spread water across a sun-baked landscape and you invite the air to drink first. Large reservoirs create vast mirrors that reflect beauty and shed gallons. On windy afternoons, whole neighborhoods' worth of supply can vanish skyward. In a cooling climate, that's manageable. In a warming one, it's a leak you can't cork. Meanwhile, cities grew. They paved washes, built cul-de-sacs along canals, and trusted engineering to outrun physics. For a while, it worked because of borrowed reservoirs. The big lakes behind the big dams were time machines. They captured the surplus of earlier, wetter decades, some of it a historical fluke inflated by early 20th century wet years, and let people withdraw it slowly while the new climate settled in. You could pretend the river was flat, predictable, and generous. You could layer subdivisions and data centers onto an old snowpack without feeling the pinch. But the hydrologic budget never forgot the true balance. The desert ledger kept the columns straight, inflows scribed by shrinking snowpacks and drier soils, outflows lifted by heat, lawn culture, sprawling lot sizes, and year-round cooling loads. Agriculture still drank most of the region's water: alfalfa fields, cotton, pecans, lettuce, and dairies feeding national markets. Cities pointed at conservation success: low-flow fixtures, turf rebates, leak detection, and those mattered. Yet the climate raised the bill faster than savings could bank. Each degree of warming is a new line item. Each hot night pulls moisture where cooler nights used to pause the meter. Consider the ground again, below the canals, beyond the dams. Alluvial fans and deep basins hold water laid down over millennia, but those aquifers aren't lakes on demand. Recharge is slow in deserts, throttled by scant rain and fast runoff. When pumping outpaces recharge, the ground settles a little, then a lot. Storage space collapses and never returns. Pipes and canals crack, streets tilt. That's the physical world writing invoices in concrete. People sometimes ask, why not just move water around until it fits the growth? Because the map is shaped by gravity and climate, not preference. The Colorado Basin is a closed account with too many claimants. The Great Basin keeps its own water. Endorheic valleys don't share willingly. Moving 1 million acre-feet over mountains costs energy. Moving it across a desert costs more through seepage and evaporation. And each mile of pipe is a liability that ages in the sun. The shortcut instinct is powerful. The terrain doesn't care. Another misread: the desert's silence. Dry landscapes look empty, so it's easy to think they're available. But ecosystems here run on a razor's edge: riparian corridors, desert pupfish pools, cottonwood galleries, saline lakes that host migrations. Take a little and you can take a lot by accident. Dust storms rise from exposed lake beds when rivers fail to reach the shore. Air quality turns into another water story, and health joins the ledger. So how did millions arrive if the ledger is negative? Because those borrowed reservoirs, on the surface and underground, extended grace. Because the timing of the 20th century growth spurt overlapped with river years that looked normal on paper and generous in memory. Because engineering solved yesterday's timing problem with canals and pumps, and it felt like the future could be forced to fit. Meanwhile, something else was happening. The legal promises wrapped around the river didn't match the water in the channel. The paperwork was written in wet ink, literally measured during unusually fruitful years. The ledger wasn't just physical, it was legal fiction stacked on physical decline. And the lakes that once buffered that mismatch started falling, the bathtub rings climbing higher, the intake pipes creeping toward the air. This was the moment everything changed, when the lake levels dropped enough that cities could see the end of the straw. From there, the narrative moves from the rock and the sky to the signatures and the dams. If the land sets the limits, the river carries the arguments. And in the American Southwest, the biggest argument flows through a single overpromised vein. The mirage of abundance, over-allocated rivers. To see how the river became a promise it couldn't keep, go back to the 1920s. The Colorado River Compact split the basin into an upper and lower half and assigned each side a number that looked conservative on paper because the paper years were wet. Stream gauges captured a plump moment in a lean century. The math locked in roughly 15 million acre-feet per year, plus a later obligation to Mexico. The river rarely delivers that now. Paper water exceeds wet water. Upper basin states, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, New Mexico, were told they could develop later and still meet deliveries downstream. Lower basin states, California, Arizona, Nevada, built early, leaned hard, and watched cities and farms flourish under contracts that assumed the flow was stable. Then there was Mexico's treaty allocation, added in 1944, and almost nobody counted the invisible user that's always first in line: evaporation. Sun and wind take their cut off the top. Lake Mead and Lake Powell turned this mismatch into a long illusion. They acted like time machines, letting the lower basin pull steady volumes while the upper basin banked snowpack as blue walls behind Glen Canyon Dam. When the 21st century warmed and precipitation sagged, the lakes drew down rather than the taps. We kept the lights of the strip on, the sprinklers ticking, the alfalfa fields green, because the decline was hidden behind concrete. Here's what cities learn to love: return flows. When a household uses water indoors, showers, sinks, toilets, most of it cycles back through treatment plants and returns to the river or the lake, crediting the city again. That's how Las Vegas cut total withdrawals while adding people. But return flows don't help water sprayed into the desert air. They don't help with evaporative cooling towers or lawns at noon or fountains in August. Consumptive use is what counts, what leaves the system for good. If you can't return it, you can't count on it. And agriculture still accounts for the biggest consumptive slice. On paper, a desert subdivision looks thirsty. In reality, 1,000 acres of alfalfa uses more water than 1,000 backyards, even with turf. That's why cities often point to farms when they talk about conservation. But switch the lens. Those crops feed dairies and export markets. The water rights are senior. The communities built around them have their own claims to history and survival. Moving water from fields to cul-de-sacs isn't a costless swap. Jobs shift, soils dry, and rural economies hollow. Meanwhile, the hidden city in the basin is evaporation itself. The surface areas of Mead and Powell, plus dozens of smaller reservoirs and canals, add up to a municipal-scale demand that never signs a contract. Heat pulls a steady tax. In some years, losses from the two big lakes can rival the entire indoor use of a major metropolitan area. We built vast shallow banks in a warming climate and discovered they charge fees just for existing. As the lakes fell, rules kicked in. Tiered shortage declarations started rationing the lower basin. First, the junior users, Arizona's Central Arizona Project, took cuts primarily to agriculture. Nevada tightened belts, banned useless turf, boosted reuse. California leaned on senior rights and negotiated, delaying its deeper reductions. Conservation produced real gains: fewer ornamental lawns, more efficient irrigation, tighter plumbing codes, aggressive leak hunts. Yet the structural deficit remained. Even in average years, the lower basin was taking more than the river could spare because the baseline had shifted. Climate shrinkage dwarfed savings. There's a brutal asymmetry in the compact era that still shapes arguments. The upper basin must ensure a fixed delivery volume at the state line, regardless of its own wet or dry years, which means it shoulders climate risk in a way the lower basin doesn't. That tension flares when Powell dips and power generation at the dam is threatened. Hydropower revenues fund river management. When levels drop too far, turbines go quiet, money dries up, and everyone loses options at once. Inside cities, the difference between indoor and outdoor use becomes a survival plan. Las Vegas exploited return flow credits ruthlessly and rewarded residents to rip out turf. Phoenix and Tucson pushed xeriscape and tiered pricing, but the suburbs still sell shade with grass, HOAs still patrol aesthetics, and summer heat pushes people outdoors with hoses. When a lawn gives way to gravel, that saves. When it gives way to a pool, the savings shrink. Not all swaps are equal. Then there's industry. Data centers promise efficiency and talk about water recycling. Chip fabs tout closed-loop systems, yet their absolute demand rises with scale, and the water has to come from the same constrained pool. Return flows help if the facility sits on the river's plumbing. Inland, consumptive use still bites. Cooling towers blow off vapor, processed water sticks to products. Some effluent can't be reused without costly treatment. The optics are green, the footprints are complicated. Mexico sits at the delta, where the river used to braid into a rich estuary. International agreements layered on top of the compact now include sharing shortages and investing in habitat restoration, a recognition that the river is more than a pipe. But restoration also depends on volumes that are vanishing upstream. What used to be a perennial river reaching the sea now often ends in a patchwork of engineered pulses and managed wetlands. Look closely at paper water. Water rights, contracts, allocations, suballocations, these instruments trade like currency. Cities bank credits, lease shares, and swap priorities to meet growth. That buys time and flexibility, but it doesn't create rain. When everyone draws against assurances written in a fatter climate, the ledger goes red. The illusion persists because legal transfers feel like new supply. They're not. They're a reshuffling of scarcity. So the basin tries to renegotiate its future. States bargain for voluntary cuts, compensated fallowing, new accounting for evaporation, and enforcement teeth when hydrology turns ugly. That's necessary, but look at the slope of the trend. The river shrinks as temperatures rise, and hotter soils steal water before it even reaches the channel. Conservation is a race against a moving finish line. Meanwhile, cities run a parallel play, import less visible sources. They mine deeper groundwater to offset surface cuts. They expand recycled water to parks and industry. They push stricter landscaping codes and ban non-functional turf. All smart. And yet, each gain is eaten by the math of heat and growth. If the river is the main artery, these are capillaries. Useful, not sufficient. Here's the pivot that matters. When the surface runs thin, people drill. Beneath the feet of the fastest-growing metros sits a one-time bank of ancient water. It's tempting because it's close, it's cold, and you don't need a federal negotiation to turn it on. But unlike a river that refills with each winter, that bank takes centuries to recharge. The next chapter isn't about contracts. It's about what happens when the overdraft notices arrive underground. The one-time bank, aquifers you can drain only once. To understand why the drill sounds like a lifeline and a warning, you have to separate two kinds of underground water. There's renewable groundwater, shallow layers that refill slowly from local rain and snowmelt seeping through soils. Then there's fossil groundwater, deep basins laid down over thousands to tens of thousands of years when climates were cooler and wetter. The first behaves like a small paycheck. The second is an inheritance. You can spend both, but only one replenishes on a human timeline. In deserts, recharge is throttled. Thin soils, hot air, and fast runoff starve the aquifer's top layers. A few % of rainfall might make it under the root zone in a good year, less in a hot one. That's why cities loved imported surface water when it was plentiful. It spared the bank account. When surface cuts arrive, the pumps kick on, and withdrawals race ahead of deposits. Look east for a cautionary tale. The Ogallala Aquifer, stretching from Texas to South Dakota, turned prairie into one of the most productive farm belts on Earth. Center pivot circles glowed green from space, but the Ogallala is mostly fossil water. In the southern high plains, recharge is too slow to keep up with irrigation. Wells had to be drilled deeper, pumps lifted heavier columns, costs rose until fields were fallowed. Communities adapted, fewer irrigated acres, different crops, new economies. The lesson crossed state lines. An aquifer lets you borrow prosperity from the past, but the bill arrives on schedule. Out west, aquifers come in flavors. Alluvial aquifers sit in wide river valleys, shallower, coarser sediments, faster to respond. They can be recharged intentionally with flood flows or treated wastewater in spreading basins. Then there are deep basin-fill aquifers, thick stacks of sand, silt, and clay left behind as ancient lakes and rivers shifted over time. Those basins hold the big volumes that tempt fast-growing metros. Drill a municipal well field into that inheritance, and the gauges stay steady for a while. Then the cone of depression spreads, neighboring wells go dry, and the decline becomes a public meeting. When water leaves pore spaces between grains, the skeleton of the ground takes the load, clays compress, land subsides. In parts of Arizona and California, the drop has been measured in feet across broad areas. That compression is permanent. The aquifer loses storage like a squeezed sponge that can't rebound. Canals crack. Sewer lines slope the wrong way. Neighborhoods discover a tilt that wasn't there a decade earlier. Every inch of subsidence writes off future capacity. Groundwater mining is the quiet arms race of drought. Private wells, exempt from some reporting, sprout in exurban zones where municipal pipes haven't reached. Farmers secure deeper pumps to protect crops and debt payments. Cities, facing surface shortages, step up municipal drilling to keep taps pressurized. Each player treats the aquifer as a backstop. Together they turn it into a stampede. The paradox: the security blanket only works when few use it. Once everyone grabs, decline accelerates. Scarcity turns neighbors into competitors if policy doesn't step in. Water quality adds another layer of cost. As water levels drop, wells pull from older, more mineralized layers. Salinity creeps up. In some basins, arsenic concentrations rise with depth, forcing treatment upgrades or forcing wells offline. In coastal valleys like parts of California, falling groundwater invites seawater inland, salting soils and pipes. Inland deserts don't face the ocean, but they do have brines and ancient salts at depth. Every new treatment skid adds kilowatts and dollars to each gallon. Cities tout managed aquifer recharge as a fix, bank water underground in wet times to draw in dry ones. It's smart hydrology where geology allows it, but it needs surplus to store, and surplus is rarer in a warming west. It also needs the right sediments, coarse, permeable, free of clays that seal. Even then, injection wells foul, basins clog with fine particles and biofilms, and maintenance becomes a quiet tax. Recharge is necessary, it's not a magic wand. Meanwhile, something else is happening at the edges of metro maps. Master-planned communities rise on the promise of assured water supply. In some states, that certification can rely on groundwater for a set number of years. On paper, the subdivision is covered. On the ground, the drawdown shows up in shallower domestic wells nearby that weren't engineered for deep lifts. A neighborhood drills a little deeper each summer, then the trucked water shows up once the pump cavitates. The cost of living now includes a diesel bill. Consider the physics of lift. Each foot you lower the water table adds energy. Municipal systems can budget for that. Small users can't. A farmer switching from flood to drip cuts total use, but the pump still has to beat gravity. The arc of a basin's decline is visible in electric bills. That's how you know you're eating the seed corn. The same acre demands more dollars to keep green. There's also a legal wrinkle. Groundwater and surface water often share a hidden connection. Pumping near a river can pull water that would have fed the channel, turning a groundwater decision into a surface impact. In fully allocated basins, that matters. Proving and policing that linkage is technically hard and politically awkward, but the river doesn't care about paperwork. If the gradient points toward your well, the stream pays. Add climate and the pace quickens. Hotter soils suck up more of each storm, reducing deep percolation. Intense bursts run off before they can soak. Snowpacks that lingered into late spring once fed valley aquifers via slow release. Earlier melts and rain-on-snow events spike flows when recharge windows aren't open. The aquifer gets skinnier inputs and faces fatter straws. Micro-stories make the math human. A small town outside a booming metro loses pressure across a weekend. The culprit isn't a broken main. It's a subdivision 5 miles away that finished its wellfield and started testing. A dairy switches to purchased feed because the cost to lift water makes forage unprofitable, then sells a water right to a city, then sheds jobs. An HOA fines a homeowner for letting turf go brown while the city mails out drought notices. These frictions don't make headlines, they make daily life brittle. People ask about technology. Can't we meter every well, recycle every drop, and model every aquifer to keep within safe yield? We can do better than we are. Metering and reporting close data gaps. Conjunctive management, coordinating surface and groundwater, reduces blind spots. Reuse turns 1 gallon into 2 uses, but the ceiling sits where recharge meets demand. Safe yield in a desert is smaller than people think, and climate is pushing it lower. So the one-time bank becomes a policy puzzle. Do you cap pumping by basin and let markets find the price? Do you protect shallow domestic wells first? Do you prioritize municipal reliability over irrigation that keeps food and jobs local? Every choice picks winners. The longer the region waits, the fewer options remain, because compression and quality losses are irreversible on human timelines. The story of growth in the West borrowed twice, first from rivers made predictable by dams, then from aquifers made accessible by cheap power. The river is settling its accounts. The bank beneath our feet is doing the same. Even if you find water down there, the heat above keeps raising the bill, and each gallon takes more to lift, treat, and deliver. The meter is running, and the desert doesn't offer overdraft protection. The triage map: who shrinks, who survives. Start with the 4 levers that decide who can keep the taps steady: source diversity, storage and conveyance resilience, legal seniority, and heat exposure. Add one more that matters as much as any: how fast a city can change behavior without breaking itself. When you layer those maps, patterns emerge that don't match the billboards. Phoenix sits on a diversified portfolio: salt and verd rivers through SRP, Colorado River via CAP, reclaimed water, and a groundwater buffer. On a chart that looks sturdy. On the ground, 2 anchors wobble. CAP is junior in the lower basin triage, already absorbing cuts that first hit agriculture and could press urban margins in deeper shortages. The salt and verd are snowpack dependent, with rising variability and fire scars that load sediment into reservoirs. Phoenix's edge is institutional: aggressive conservation, drought-ready rate structures, and a reuse backbone feeding parks, industry, and cooling. Its weak flank is geography: sprawling fringe growth far from cores, hotter nights, and a heavy dependence on long-haul CAP energy. Verdict: survivable with a slimmer footprint and painful peripheral slowdowns. Tucson reads similar, but leans even harder into prudence. It banked CAP water underground for years, built culture around desert landscaping, and keeps per capita use low. It's downstream of fewer fire-prone headwaters than Phoenix and has less salt verd exposure, but shares CAP's legal vulnerability. Tucson's heat is brutal but slightly softer at night than Phoenix's urban core. The city's triage lever is stored groundwater and the discipline to keep it stored until truly needed. Verdict: smaller growth runway than boosters promise, but stronger odds of steady service if it resists sprawl. Las Vegas is a paradox: legally constrained, physically precarious, operationally elite. 90% of supply rides the Colorado through Lake Mead, but the Southern Nevada Water Authority built the low lake level pumping station and a deep intake that can sip near dead pool. Indoor use returns to the lake and earns credits. Turf bans bite. Enforcement is real. The legal picture is mixed. Nevada's slice is small, but Las Vegas' efficiency stretches it far. Heat exposure is intense, but density core services help. The wild card is structural. If Mead slips into crisis, even the best pumps run on a shrinking pie. Verdict: resilient relative to peers because of execution, still capped by a single source. Salt Lake's fate pivots on a lake most residents never counted in their water bill. The Great Salt Lake buffers climate, captures dust, and signals watershed health. As tributary diversions and drought drove it to record lows, dust storms carried arsenic and fine salts into neighborhoods. Water portfolios along the Wasatch Front mix canyon streams, reservoirs, and groundwater, with reuse growing. Legal seniority is patchy across dozens of districts. Heat exposure is rising, but elevation offers pockets of relief. The triage trigger here is ecological collapse. Agencies must reserve more tributary flow to stabilize lake levels, which forces indoor conservation and outdoor cuts faster than growth models assumed. Verdict: survivable with concerted lake-first policy. Without it, public health costs rewrite priorities. Along Colorado's Front Range, triage is a negotiation across a mountain. Cities import through straws poked under the Continental Divide, then compete with agriculture on the plains and with endangered species flows that require certain river levels. Portfolio diversity helps. Colorado Big Thompson shares, senior local rights, reuse, but wildfire in headwaters threatens storage, and legal seniority is a mosaic. Heat exposure is widening east of the foothills, and population pressure is relentless. The region can buy water on markets and build reuse, but each imported acre-foot gets pricier and riskier. Verdict: selective survivability in cores with infill and reuse. Exurban growth faces hard caps and intermittent drought-driven retreats. Boise's Treasure Valley looks flush until you tighten the lens. Snow-fed reservoirs above town, irrigation districts with senior rights, and historically leaky flood irrigation that recharged shallow aquifers once buffered growth. Modern efficiency and suburban conversion reduce that incidental recharge. Wildfire risk in headwaters grows, and late summer flows already pinch. Boise has more local control than a CAP city, but less redundancy than a megametro. Verdict: strong if growth clusters near existing mains with strict outdoor budgets. vulnerable if sprawl and fire seasons expand in tandem. Now ranked by legal seniority in the Colorado Basin, California's big agricultural districts hold priority muscle that shields urban users in moderate shortages. Metropolitan Water District blends Colorado State Water Project imports and local supplies with extensive storage. But California's shield isn't infinite. Deeper tier cuts, new evaporation accounting, and ecological mandates tighten margins. Phoenix and Tucson are junior via CAP. Las Vegas is small but nimble. Front-range cities ride upper basin obligations that fix deliveries downstream regardless of snow. On a pure priority ladder, California's coastal cities look safest, but they face their own delta smelt constraints, droughts, and heat-driven demand. Source diversity narrows winners. Cities with at least 3 distinct buckets, local rivers, imported surface, and a mature reuse program outrun single-source peers. Add managed aquifer storage in permeable alluvium and you buy drought elasticity. Las Vegas lacks diversity but compensates with precision. Phoenix has diversity and scale. Salt Lake needs the lake. Boise has local rivers and irrigation networks to retool. Front-range metros rely on imports plus fragmented local rights. Heat exposure tilts the table. Nighttime minima rising fastest in Phoenix and Las Vegas inflate summer baselines. Salt Lake and Boise heat up, but elevation and diurnal swings soften edges for now. Front-range heat climbs with urban expansion on the plains. Cities that cool their asphalt, shade, cool roofs, reflective pavements, reduce cumulative demand and leaks, turning climate adaptation into water policy. Those that don't pay twice. Storage buys time but not certainty. Surface storage in a drying regime leaks to sky. Underground banks work where geology cooperates and surplus exists. Phoenix and Tucson's groundwater banking shines. Front-range aquifer storage is promising but uneven. Las Vegas' bank is Mead itself, and that bank is shrinking. Salt Lake's storage is ecosystem function in the lakebed, which demands inflows more than walls. Industrial footprints shift ranks at the margins. A new fab can tip a suburban district's balance. Data center clusters add steady loads and grid stress that echo into pump schedules. Regions that require industrial reuse and full accounting stay ahead. Regions that chase ribbon cuttings first scramble later. So who shrinks, who survives? Nobody escapes the math. Survival means managed constraint. Phoenix can survive with slower fringe build-out, steeper outdoor pricing, and deeper reuse, while taking agriculture cuts that ripple through food sheds and politics. Tucson survives by staying Tucson, banked water, desert form, cautious growth. Las Vegas survives by staying relentless on indoor efficiency and outdoor bans, riding its deep intake and hoping basin deals hold. Salt Lake survives only if the Great Salt Lake is treated as infrastructure, not scenery, forcing tributary protection and aggressive conservation. The Front Range survives in cause, but exurban nodes will stall or retreat as imports tighten and headwaters burn. Boise survives if it densifies and reinvents recharge. If not, late summer scarcity will set hard limits. Triage isn't doom, it's prioritization. Cores with hospitals, jobs, and transit keep pressure and shade. Fringe subdivisions on thin wells don't. Senior rights holders keep water unless intake strand or ecology collapses, while junior users pay first and hardest. Cities that turn outdoor water into a luxury through price and code preserve indoor lifelines, those that won't learn in court or at the ballot box. The map won't announce winners. It will show them quietly, neighborhoods where grass fades to shade trees and bills level off, cul-de-sacs where tanker trucks visit, reservoirs that stabilize at new normals, a lake ring that stops climbing because people upstream left more water in the channel. Survival looks smaller, tighter, and hotter, but still livable. Shrinkage looks like denial turned into drift. Human stories when water becomes a second rent. Start with a bill on a fridge. In West Phoenix, Elena's water statement used to hover around $40 most months. Then the tiered rates nudged up, summers got longer, and outdoor budgets tightened. Now it's $85 in July before the power bill arrives. She times laundry for off-peak hours, showers her kids at the gym on soccer nights, and stares at the red line on the usage graph like it's a grade she has to fix. Water became a second rent, non-negotiable, rising, and not something you can skip for a week. 3 miles away, Carl manages a fourplex with a thin margin. His city banned non-functional turf, and his HOA still insists on green frontage. He rips out grass to avoid fines, installs drip and swaps to desert plants. Then the HOA cites him for neighborhood character. He goes to the meeting with receipts. They go home to sprinklers set for dawn. The city's code and the HOA's rulebook fight in his front yard, and the bill lands on his ledger. In Henderson, a landscaper named Yvette has to explain new rules to clients who just moved from Ohio. They love palms, emerald lawns, and Saturday sprinklers. She pulls up the app that shows evapotranspiration forecasts and watering restrictions. "You'll lose this turf," she says, "or you'll pay for it every month." Half nod, half insist. A season later, she's back to replace fried sod with gravel and a few hardy shrubs. Her crew survives on the churn that Scarcity created: rip out, rebate, replant, while residents learn by invoice. Farmers weigh different math. Outside Casa Grande, Armando has a mortgage on a pivot and a son in college. CAP cuts sent less water to his ditch, so the choice is drip or fallow. He invests in drip with a low-interest program, cuts his total water use, and squeezes 1 more ton from the field. But the pump runs longer to lift deeper groundwater, and the power bill eats the savings. When the city offers to lease his water 1 year out of 3, a check arrives that steadies the books, and the packing shed in town cuts shifts because crops dropped. Water moved uphill, jobs drifted away. Workers feel it in heat, not policy. In Salt Lake's west side, Eddie runs deliveries for a warehouse that missed its loading dock to keep crews from tapping out in August. The mist is a thin comfort. He buys extra bottles from a gas station that jacked prices during a heat spike, then hears about a neighborhood main break that shut off taps for hours. The city trucked in water, but Eddie was on shift. He gets home, opens the faucet, and air sputters out. Hydration is a policy word until you can't pour a glass for your kid. Data center techs in the Front Range learn the new choreography. On red alert heat days, operations switch to dry cooling, power use jumps, and the water meters rest. On monsoon humidity days, the system flips to hybrid to protect chips, and the evaporation rises. Sarah, an operator, can't say what the monthly draw is because it's wrapped in the park's utility account. She knows the alarms: tower blowdown elevated. She also knows her neighbors went from 60 feet to 95 in 4 years, and they're pooling money for a deeper pump. Here's a micro story. An exurban subdivision outside Boise drilled domestic wells to 180 feet and celebrated independence. The first summer felt fine. The third summer, the construction phase ended, and 20 more houses tapped in. By August, sprinklers coughed. One homeowner, Darius, woke to a dry shower. The HOA hired a truck to fill the small community tank at dawn and dusk. Diesel, overtime, and bulk water fees turned into a $300 monthly assessment. Independence became a convoy. Shutoffs shift behavior fast. In parts of the Central Valley, households on income-based plans still face late fees that stack. Miss 2 payments and the orange tag appears. Miss 3 and a shutoff notice lands. Parents fill coolers at a church drive, bathe toddlers with wipes, and pray the next paycheck clears before the door hanger returns. Cities hate wielding the wrench. They also have bond covenants and payrolls. Charities bridge gaps, but summer adds gaps no spreadsheet saw coming. Meanwhile, a small-town council fights over a golf course. The course leases treated effluent, a civic pride play in the 90s. Now the plant wants that water for industrial cooling and parks. The course argues tourism. The plant argues heat and power. Residents fill a meeting room with hats and signs. The decision splits neighbors who share fences and holidays, and a ballot measure sprouts from a drought. This is where culture bends. HOAs rewrite covenants and swap lush for shade. Cities approve greywater plumbing in new builds. Landscapers become water coaches. Schoolyards trade grass for shade sales and cooling stations. Farmers sign rotational fallowing deals with cities and keep the packing shed alive 2 years out of 3. Utilities carve out lifeline indoor rates and price outdoor use steeply, so water stays affordable for life, not for lawns. Dignity runs through each fix. No one wants a lecture with a shutoff. They want time, tools, and a path that doesn't humiliate. When water becomes a second rent, the policies that work look like this: Protect a humane indoor baseline, make outdoor luxury pay its own way, and fund the bridge for those caught between old rules and new bills. Choices get real when the tap is a bill you can't pay. The next chapter asks how to design for that reality without turning neighbors into adversaries. Designing within limits, a different West. If the math points toward less, the design has to point toward smarter. Start with form. The cheapest gallon is the one you don't have to pump across 10 miles of hot pavement. Compact growth near existing mains shortens every run. Less friction loss, fewer booster stations, faster leak response, and smaller peak loads at dusk, when sprinklers usually roar. Zoning that stacks housing over services means one pressure zone can serve thousands without a maze of extensions. Cities can steer this with impact fees that climb sharply beyond the core, and with by right approvals for infill that shave years off building timelines. Kill exurban sprawl with alternatives, not admonitions. Permit missing middle housing in established neighborhoods so families don't have to jump the fence line to find space. Swap minimum parking for maximums. Every acre of asphalt is a heat engine and a runoff problem. Let corner lots host duplexes and triplexes that share a single lateral. Tie approvals to demonstrated wet water, not paper plans, proof that supply exists without mining the aquifer for 20 years and walking away. When homebuilders complain, pair streamlining with certainty, clear rules, fast permits inside the footprint, and real costs outside it. Now cool the city without sprinklers. Cool roofs reflect solar load, lowering indoor temperatures and easing the grid. Shade canopies over sidewalks and bus stops change behavior. People walk, wait, and linger without misting stations. Reflective streets lower nighttime temperatures, cutting pipe fatigue and leak rates. Plant the right trees in the right places with basins that catch roof runoff, and commit to establishment watering with smart controllers. A tree that reaches maturity pays back for decades in evaporative cooling and storm interception, even in a desert. Tie public shade plans to transit corridors and schools first. Heat relief, where bodies are most vulnerable. Outdoor demand is culture, code, and price. Ban non-functional turf and mean it. Allow small water features only with on-site recirculation and covers. Require soil amendments and deep mulch under any new landscape to lock in moisture. Mandate weather-based irrigation controllers on every new meter and retrofit them in phases across existing stock with rebate and enforce programs. Price outdoor use on a steep block tariff above a protected indoor lifeline so households feel each marginal gallon where it matters, at the spigot, not on a poster. Publish neighborhood water dashboards so social cues nudge behavior before citations do. On farms, design for flexibility, not fantasy. Pay for fallowing with dignity, multi-year contracts that cover fixed costs, not just a seasoned seed. Support crop switching where markets and soils allow. Less alfalfa for export, more drought-fit rotations that keep local jobs. Invest in on-farm efficiency with real technical help, not just coupons, drip, soil moisture sensors, canopy management, but pair it with salinity support because salts rise when flows fall. Build compensated, interruptible supply programs that let cities rent water in dry years rather than buy rights outright, so valleys keep their backbone and can plan around predictable pauses. Managed aquifer recharge belongs in the toolkit, but only where geology says yes. Map permeable alluvium, test injection zones, and design basins that can handle monsoon bursts without clogging. Couple recharge with flood control. Spread flows onto dedicated fields that double as parks most of the year. Use advanced purification to feed injection wells when river flows are low and treatment plants have surplus capacity. And be honest, deep basin fill aquifers won't refill at the rate we pump them. Treat recharge as a local savings account, not a bailout for fossil water. Water markets need guardrails. Protect conserved water so rights holders aren't punished for using less. Create transparent exchanges that allow short-term transfers with clear public benefits and strict monitoring. Build third-party impact funds into every deal so rural schools, ditches, and small towns aren't collateral damage. Reserve a base right for ecosystems, actual flow targets with enforcement, because dead rivers cost money in dust, tourism losses, and treatment, and because living streams stitch communities to place. Tribal water rights must move from recognition to pipes, fund the infrastructure, intakes, treatment, conveyance that lets tribes exercise senior rights, lease on their terms, and invest in local economies. Those leases can stabilize regional portfolios without permanent dispossession. Government-to-government deals can set a standard, revenue to communities long excluded, reliability to cities living on the edge, and restored flows to reaches that teach kids what a river looks like. Integrate energy with water scheduling. Run big pumps when the grid has solar surplus. Pair lift stations with on-site storage and batteries to ride through peak hours and outages. Cover canals with solar where maintenance pencils out. Shade reduces evaporation and feeds the pumps below. Modernize SCADA to predict leaks before they break and to nudge pressure zones down a notch without risking fire flows. Every kilowatt saved on pumping returns as headroom for heat waves. Codes should hardwire resilience, require greywater-ready plumbing in new construction, and offer rebates for retrofits that route showers and laundry to landscape basins. Pre-plumb for dual systems where reclaimed water is available so parks, schools, and industry can switch without ripping streets open later. Standardize meter data access so residents and businesses can track use in real time and catch leaks before bills explode. Tie occupancy permits to functional smart controllers and soil depth checks. Aesthetics don't keep taps running, but enforcement-backed standards do. Design also means saying no with a plan. Draw urban service boundaries that match sustainable supply and adjust them only when portfolios truly expand, not when headlines demand it. Freeze new taps in basins already in overdraft until a recovery path is real, funded, and monitored. Offer buyouts or swap deals at the fringe where trucking water has become normal, helping families relocate within the service footprint instead of stranding them with rising assessments and dry wells. Shrink politely. Keep schools and clinics open in cores, consolidate lines where half-empty subdivisions bleed money, and turn distant cul-de-sacs into open space with native cover that needs a fraction of the maintenance. Finally, build a social contract. Guarantee a humane indoor lifeline, enough for health and dignity, shielded from price spikes. Fund arrearage relief during heat emergencies so shutoffs don't become heat strokes. Price outdoor water to signal scarcity without criminalizing being poor. Back it with clear enforcement for luxury waste, whether that's a 7-day fountain or a winter overseed that drinks like July. Pair every no with a here's how, rebates, design guides, contractors trained to deliver shade and savings, not just gravel moonscapes. A different West isn't a sermon. It's a set of blueprints that treat geography as the client. Compact where the pipes already run, cool the city with shade instead of spray, pay farmers to rest fields without erasing towns, let tribes turn rights into revenue and rivers, store water underground where it fits, run pumps with the sun, protect a basic indoor right, and make outdoor luxury speak the truth on the bill. Even with better design, the arc bends toward less. The goal is simple: make less livable, fair, and durable. Resolution and broader meaning. The West grew by pretending the desert would blink first. It didn't. Living here won't end, but living large is already on notice. Geography sets the bill. We only choose how and how fairly to pay it. If you want the follow-up on how the Great Salt Lake's collapse rewrites Utah's future, air, health, and law, watch the next episode. Subscribe to GeoQuest for more stories the map has been trying to tell us for a century, and share this with someone who still thinks paperwork can outvote rivers.